DSS spokesperson Peter Afunanya, in a statement, says that the DSS has identified some key players behind a plot to disrupt Nigeria's democracy after the 2023 general elections. He said that the DSS considers the plots being pursued by these entrenched interests as not only an aberration, but a mischievous way to set aside the Constitution and undermine civil rule, as well as plunge the country into crisis. He said the plots to impose an interim government are being planned through protests in the country and court orders to block the transition of power to the next government. Joining me now is Mike Ejiofor, retired director with the State Security Service, and he joins me to look at what is a developing situation in Nigeria. Mr. Ejiofor, welcome to Politics HQ. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So in terms of this statement, which was released yesterday, which the DSS itself says was meant to serve as a warning to those planning to somehow install an interim government, do you think it's going to achieve its aim of warning those who may be making these kind of plans?
Of course, it will achieve the aim because, the State Security Service is not flippant or, it's not a service that issues always. And they came up with a statement saying that meetings have been held and options considered. That means that they have details of what is going on. And, because of the tense security of the political situation we have in our country, because people have been calling, why issue that statement? Why don't you go straight and effect an arrest? And the answer is simple. With the charged political atmosphere, you just go in and people will read political ministry to it. And not also forget that the State Security Service said that the people, at the end of that statement, that the people should desist from doing what they are doing. That is not all to say that they will not. They will stop at that. So it's a warning that the people should just be careful on what they are doing, and they will look at the situation where further investigation will be made. Personally, to the people to see how they can stop these heinous actions.
So in terms of this, we have Nigeria now, which is a democracy of some 24 unbroken years. And I know many people would believe that the country has really entrenched democracy so much that something like this cannot happen, given the fact that the last interim government Nigeria had was about 30-something years ago, lasting about 80-something days. Do you think Nigeria has really entrenched democracy? Nigeria has passed the stage of witnessing such attacks on its democracy?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, the conception of an interim government is an aberration, and it's unthinkable for our politicians who are just, out to derail our democracy to contemplate that. But I can tell you that it's an unconstitutional means of change. That's compassion. With maintenance of prevention and detection of crimes against the state. It's corruption is one of them. So any need of changing government without a constitution is a breach of the law, and will be used very seriously. I think the Nigerian government is how this rule can be brought to book.
So some say that this warning is actually coming a bit late. So we have heard from the APC and PDP, which have asked the DSS to make arrests, but we've also heard from the spokesperson of the Labour Party, Yunusa Tanko, and in his statements, he asked, where was the DSS when the party's members were attacked, especially in Lagos? He also asked where the DSS was when there were incidents of ethnic profiling, violence, and more. And we know that on Saturday, the DSS also warned politicians to desist from peddling hate speech and all forms of false narratives to ignite violence or even pit the citizens against President Buhari's government or even the incoming administration of President-elect Bola Ahmed Tinubu. So what exactly should be expected of the DSS in the situations we see before us relating to the elections in terms of what we saw in the past few months and what Nigeria seems to currently be experiencing right now?
Well, I don't want to join issue with politicians. If you recall, before the election, the SSS issued another warning, an earlier one, that the election was going to be violent, and the people who were making statements of inflaming passion and making the situation to deteriorate, that they are being monitored. So what they are doing is actually that the SSS hardly before the case started, you build up your cases. The final thing to do is arrest when the case must have been completed and built up.
So there are some concerns about one or two particular lines in that statement, and the DSS mentioned that parties were attempting to obtain frivolous court injunctions to forestall the inauguration of the new executive. Is sort of the conversation around declaring a case that's brought by an independent party or a Nigerian citizen as frivolous, is that something under the purview of the DSS? Because some are wondering if that doesn't go too close to a fine line that the department should not be looking to cross.
Well, we have three acts of government, executive, judiciary, and the legislature. And if you like I said, the DSS had its own source of information on three issues. This last question gives me the greatest worry of all the questions that the SSS, because we are not unconscious of the fact that even among the very senior lawyers, layman's sake, they are expressing lack of confidence in the judiciary. So I don't see the possibility of one judge, giving an order, to buttress these allegations being made by us. Not also forget the Association for Better Nigeria that got an injunction in 1993 or that, which led to the truncation of the then administration with the establishment of interim government. But then, that is under a military government. Under a constitutional government, I don't think that is possible. So, what we should be doing is that we must monitor the legislature, the judiciary. You see, the executive has been occupied by Nigerians, the legislature has been occupied. Because Nigerians have become very sensitive and conscious in the environment. There's a possibility of Nigerians also occupying the judiciary. Use of language. Judgments that have grown the issue of the judgment of the governor of Imo State made so many funny judgments. People are really confident in the judiciary, and I think the earlier the judiciary trace its steps as the last hope of the common man, the better for all of us. But this situation would have been avoided. I don't if you are being with this country. But they failed to transmit the results from the polling booth to the iron, and that is what is giving all these problems in the country. It's not unfortunate.
Yes, it's very true what you say in terms of being able to trace back some of the tensions to what happened with the election. So there are a lot of things and steps that must happen before an interim government could even be installed in Nigeria. And from your understanding, what are some of the scenarios that would need to be in play, would need to happen before we could hear about an interim government, given the fact that that language, interim governments, Nigeria's constitution doesn't even provide for such a government. So are there plausible scenarios that would need to play out for Nigeria to see an interim government in 2023, in the 21st century?
I can't. I've sat down several times. People have called me and have had discussions. I think there's no way you can contemplate an interim government in this present dispensation. It's an aberration. It's something that is you cannot think about it. So how are you going to do it? The government is he the present president, the incumbent president, or the on what ground? Is it constitutional? It means of constitutionally changing, which is subversion. It is one of the crimes against the state. So any means of without duly electing people to change the government is a crime against the state and must be used. There's no provision in our constitution, and it should not be fought out.
So it feels like I'm about to play devil's advocate here, Mr. Ejiofor, but let me ask this. If for some situation, unfortunate things align and there was to be an interim government in Nigeria, what do you think the implications would be for the country?
Well, no, there's no complaint devil's advocate. I've said that I don't contemplate an interim government because it is unconstitutional. And I don't see it coming. But for judiciary, if judiciary comes, maybe the tribunal or the high court comes up, the matter is going to proceed to the Supreme Court and before the final decision is taken. So we cannot just take one. I can't complicate, honestly speaking.
Okay, so let me ask you this. In terms of the opposition, we've seen, of course, that opposition political parties have approached the courts. There is, of course, conversation about this potentially the reactions to the case eventually leading to the Supreme Court. But in terms of that, do you think politicians across the spectrum bear responsibility right now to come out and to speak very, very strongly about anybody who's attempting to plot about an interim government, or to even lay to bed some of the tensions we've seen in the past few weeks since the presidential elections? Do you believe politicians across the spectrum right now bear a responsibility to come out and find a way to douse the tensions and stand against those who might be plotting an interim government? All right, so I think we're having connectivity issues with my guest, Mike Ejiofor, retired director, State Security Service, looking at the conversation around the DSS, coming out to say that it has confirmed that there are plans to bring about an interim government in Nigeria. Now, interestingly enough, there's no such term, or there's no space for such things like that in Nigeria's constitution. So many are wondering how this would even possibly come about. But some of the accusations that the DSS have laid forward is that there are those who are planning to do mass violent protests as a way to bring about a state of emergency, as well as those who might be attempting to use frivolous court injunctions or court orders in order to sort of bring more attention to the space and find themselves with an interim government. But reiterating again, there is no space for such in Nigeria's constitution, and Nigeria is a democracy for some 24 years running now, and many people are vested in keeping Nigeria as a democracy. Unfortunately, my last question I won't be able to put to Mr. Ejiofor, and that's basically looking at the fact that in terms of the situation, what happens now? There are those who have called for arrest. There are those who have said the DSS should not have released the statements, but have gone straight ahead to arrest people who might be involved. And there are those who have said the statement should suffice as warning enough. In the coming days, we'll definitely hear more, because this is a developing situation coming out of Nigeria. I just said earlier on Saturday that the DSS also did make statements regarding narratives and the type of speech, hate speech, that might be emanating from different quarters of the country. Well, this is where we draw the curtain on Politics HQ tonight. Thank you so much to my guest, Mike Ejiofor, retired director, State Security Service, as well as Olukayode Salako, the former chairman of the Labour Party in Lagos. A number of issues we're able to look at and hopefully give some clarity and some context to things you're hearing about in the political space here in Nigeria. I'll say many thanks for watching, and I hope to see you soon. I'm Tolulope Adeleru-Balogun. Have a good night.